I'll call us to order. Welcome back from your July recess to your Fort Worth City Council work session. Today is August 1st and 106 degrees. At least we're inside. Motion to extend break? Okay. Okay, well, it's gonna be a while. All jokes aside, thank you very much. I hope staff got a little bit of a reprieve from seeing us over the last month. And with that, David, I guess I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Come on. All right. First thing up, I'm going to call on Dana Bergdorf to introduce a new interim director. Dana.
All right, if I can, Ricky Zalazar, come on up. So you'll all recall that we got to say goodbye to Steve Cook as our property management director, and so we needed to name an interim director while we recruit for that position, and I'm thrilled to report that Ricky Salazar has agreed to take on that mantle. Ricky is born and raised in Fort Worth, a Texas Tech graduate. He's a registered professional landman. He's a certified real estate agent, and he's has been serving as the assistant director for our real property division, so handling all of the purchases and sales of city property, as well as leases that we both give out or take on, including gas leasing. So he's got a great portfolio and a lot of great knowledge about Fort Worth and a love for Fort Worth. So wanted to make sure you knew Ricky and would be able to reach out to him for any questions that you might have about property management, not just real property, but also now buildings, facilities, and our city fleet. So Ricky, congratulations.
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you.
And then want to give Ricky a chance to introduce one of his new hires. So I'll turn it over to you, Ricky.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I look forward to serving in this interim role as Director of the Property Management Department. But I'm also wanting to introduce Eliana Guevara. If she stand up. I told her I wouldn't make her talk, so I'm going to hold up to that promise. But we're pleased to announce the promotion of Eliana Guevara to the Assistant Director of General Service Division for the Property Management Department. Eliana has been an integral part of property management for 7 years now. She's been with the city for 11 years, started as an intern for the mayor's office and financial management service department. And she worked her way up to a management analyst and a budget analyst. And so she's been with us for 7 years. So we're really excited to have her join our team as the new Assistant Director of General Services. So please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Ricky. Next up are informal reports. I think when we were back in June, the last set was 20-some. Now we're at 3. It's much better. So the first one is on the 2023 to 2027 consolidated plan, and Victor Turner is available if there are any questions. Everybody good? All right. Next up is a report on the city street maintenance schedule, and Lauren Priere is available if there are any questions.
I just have a comment, and thanks to staff for putting this together. It was very helpful to me. I would just like maybe for Lauren's team and Renee to work together on how do we put this into format that's actually easy for public consumption. Y'all may already be on top of that. Maybe there's something I don't know about. I get lots of questions about this. I would just like to be able to point constituents to something easy to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And so first, I'd like to acknowledge our pavement management staff led by Dr. Omar El-Bagalati. We have not one but 2 PhDs leading this effort. So there's 2 things. One, we are more than happy to come out to your community meetings to discuss this in detail. We'd love to give you a presentation, but also on October 11th, 2022, we gave a presentation on this very topic to the Mobility, Infrastructure, and Transportation Committee. So if you want to go back on YouTube or the City of Fort Worth TV, you can rewatch that presentation at your leisure. So,
thank you, Lauren. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all very much.
And the third informal report is on the Will Rogers Memorial Center capital budget and a funding change. And Michael Crum is available if there's any questions.
Any questions from council? No? Okay, thank you.
All right, this is a record time. Mayor, my report's complete.
Well, look at that. Now I have to go back to my thing. First up is any questions on upcoming significant zoning cases, anything that staff needs to be aware of leading into August 8th meeting? And any questions regarding the M&C log that's scheduled for August 8th? Okay. Next would be our annual update on operations for the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. I know that Dave Lewis is here from Parks and Recreation. And then Patrick Newman, who is our CEO and president of our wonderful Brit and Fort Worth Botanic Garden. Thank you, Patrick, for being here.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Good to see you again. Dave Lewis, Interim Director of Park and Recreation Department. As you can recall, in October of 2020, we entrusted the management of the Fort Worth Botanic Garden to BRIT, the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. They've been tremendous partners. They've made great progress in advancing the success of the gardens. As you know, we also came in front of you in February to get their master plan endorsed and also adopted as an amendment to the Park Recreation Open Space Master Plan, as well as the city's comprehensive plan. So I'm happy to introduce Patrick Newman, the President and CEO of Botanic Research Institute of Texas, BRIT, Botanic Garden, all of it. So I'm gonna actually switch so he can have the good side. So Patrick?
Thank you, Dave. Mayor, Council, it's good to be with you all, and happy to give you an update on where we are at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. Let me make sure this is working for us. Maybe.
I'll try on the screen.
It's gonna be a short report.
The batteries go dead on the break.
Thank you. Which one do I have? Oh, that one's, got it. All right, so a couple of new faces on the council, so I thought it might be appropriate just to kind of remind you or share with you a few facts about the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. It is the oldest botanic garden in Texas, roughly 120 acres. When we combined both the Botanical Research Institute of Texas and the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, we collectively created one of the largest botanic gardens and botanical research centers in the U.S. And so some really great and very exciting things happening at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. As per our management agreement with the city, we are asked to report on an annual basis and keep you informed as to how things are going at the Botanic Garden. I'm here to say they're going very well. Are there any questions? There are 4 key benchmarks that we like to report on, and these are spelled out in the management agreement. Again, they are really growth and attendance, maintaining accessibility by keeping a minimum of 10% of our admissions either free or discounted. We want to demonstrate growth in non-city funding, so growth in our other funding streams, and then show that there is increased participation in our various education and community programs. So let me begin first with visitation and admission. We're comparing fiscal year 2020 to fiscal year 2022. And so that we have an apples to apples comparison here, we're not including in that 255,000 number. We're not including concerts in the garden because we didn't have concerts in the garden in 2020. We're also not including admission from our Lightscape event because we didn't have that in 2020. You factor both of those in, our visitation is about 362,000 guests a year over what you see there in 2022. So, excuse me, in 2020. So great growth in terms of visitation, and we anticipate that will continue in subsequent years. As that relates to gate receipts and revenue, you can see that we went from roughly $1 million in gate receipts to 2.2 in 2022, and then we're forecasting roughly 2.7 this fiscal year in earned revenue through the gate. Part of that is through a modest increase in admission prices that we made last year. It's a kind of a quasi dynamic system. It allowed us to keep one ticket price flat. So anyone who purchases a ticket in advance online, there was no increase to that cost. But then when we know we're going to be busy, we know there's high demand, we can increase the price just a little bit. So it's a way for us to increase our revenue just a little bit. In terms of accessibility and hitting that 10% mark, you can kind of see we're just over that 10% mark with just over 25,000 guests who receive free or reduced admissions. And we continue to work on that number as our overall admissions increase. That number becomes more and more difficult to hit. This summer, we've been offering a buy one, get one free admission through the whole summer. It's been warm outside. People have been responding to that. So that will, of course, help us with these numbers as well. But we also are targeting audiences. We have the Muse Pass, which is in libraries, rather, that people can check out, free admission, if you will. We distribute a large number of free passes. We're part of Museums for All, which means anyone with a SNAP card, that individual and anyone that's in their party gets in for free anytime. So we continue to work on that number, but happy to report that we hit the 10%. And then in terms of funding and looking at how city funding is decreasing as an overall percentage of our funding, you can see in that first column there on your left that it's gone from 67 to 43%. I would say admissions and membership are probably the two earned revenue categories that are carrying that growth and allowing us to sort of move away from dependency on the city funding. We still, to be clear, we still want the city funding. We're just not as dependent. And then in terms of programming, we gave you a 4-year snapshot here so you can see that 2019 numbers, those are pre-pandemic. So this is sort of looking at how we are recovering in terms of visitation and programming post-pandemic. You'll see modest recovery in a couple of categories. This by no means indicates all of the depth of program we have, but these are kind of our 4 biggest areas. You'll see the biggest growth in community education and also significant growth in elementary student visitation. Part of that is our focus on 4th grade and providing STEM opportunities for every 4th grade student in Fort Worth. And so that's why you're seeing an increase a pretty rapid increase on the elementary student side. And then as we look to be renowned globally, both for the research that we do, but also treasured locally here in Fort Worth, we put a lot of emphasis on the community education piece to be able to provide educational and programming opportunities for our community. Any questions about those 4 metrics before I jump into some projects? Seeing none, I'll jump into projects. So one that we reported on last time, and again, there's some new faces, so let me just quickly bring you up to speed on our comprehensive master plan. We selected ultimately Design Workshop Studio Outside out of Dallas, and they led us through a really kind of a year-long process in creating a long-term vision for the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. It includes the entire campus, all 120 acres. I'm not going to go into great detail, but do want to just highlight a couple of things. We are in the silent phase of the first project, which is a roughly 2-acre family garden. That'll be a $19 million capital campaign that will be completely privately funded. The next projects that will be sort of in queue on your, I guess that's your top right, you'll see a permanent band shell and stage. Each summer we host concerts in the garden along with our great friends at the Fort Worth Symphony and Orchestra. At their expense, they bring in a temporary stage, build it up, all of the infrastructure that's associated with it, and then we tear that down at the end of the program. This would be a way for us to have a permanent facility that benefits the symphony and orchestra, but it's also an opportunity for us to dramatically increase our cultural offerings. It could be performance art, could be movies, could be dance, could be a whole host of things. So a way for us to really make this, I mean, this is in the same part of the garden where we currently hold concerts in the garden. This creates a sort of a cultural hub at the garden for us. And then new entry sequence, which includes a parking garden and a whole new entry sequence that is outdoors and allows us to increase our gate receipts as well.
Mayor Pro Tem Bivens, do you have a question for Patrick?
It's just one, Patrick. This may
Yes.
be self-serving, but
Sure.
you're not disturbing the Spirit of Woman statue, are you?
We would never disturb.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so, which is a statue, just for your reference, that is kind of off screen just a little bit where this vista is, right? So this is a ways away from Spirit of Women. Answer the question? Yes. Great. So then just want to bring you up to speed really quickly where we stand on some of the support that has come from the city for infrastructure and deferred maintenance. The 2020 tax note program was $4.3 million, which came through the city to the Botanic Garden. And let me just really quickly give you a sense of where we're at with that. You can see most has either been encumbered or expensed, so there's just a little bit left on those projects. And let me give you a sense of what those projects look like. So the completed projects you can see on the screen there in front of you. And here are some photos that really sort of make it more real for you. So this was a significant one for us, the Moon Bridge, which had been closed to the public for quite some time. This is probably the most iconic and most photographed spot in the garden. And so it was important to us to replace this. And so we put a new Moon Bridge in, which has become incredibly popular, and people are taking photos and posting on Instagram and all the things that we wanted them to do. Significant improvements, this is another, on the left there is another improvement in the Japanese garden. On the right is a very significant improvement to the historical rose garden. When I came to Fort Worth, Mr. Cook asked me when the frogs outside of the garden center would spit. Again, they never have. But the lion's head is now spitting. So I wasn't able to deliver on the frogs. I'm sorry, Mr. Cook, but the lion's head is now, we did get that one working. The fountain, which is outside the view of this picture, the fountain is also working. It is really dramatically changed that space and returned it back to what it was historically. So we're excited about that. This is kind of a subsurface drainage improvement project that was in the South Vista that helps set the stage, no pun intended, for events like concerts in the garden and other things. It allows for that space to drain really quickly. If you've ever been at a concert after a significant rain event, you'll know that this was an improvement that needed to be made. And then this one we're really excited about, Old Garden Road, which is no longer, it's new, so we probably should consider a name change. It's not really the Old Garden Road anymore. But this was a significant improvement to the garden. If you ever left the Japanese garden through the east gate, you sort of spilled out onto an asphalt road and you wondered if you had stumbled back of house and did you really belong where you were at. This is a beautiful pedestrian promenade that connects the Fuller Garden with the Japanese garden, and really it will become the entry point for the family garden. So this is a significant project which is now complete and has been planted out. If you've not had a chance to see this, I would encourage you to come and see this firsthand. I know it's hot out, but we have what we call our beauty bus, which is a shuttle that is air conditioned. And it also, all of our shuttles have wheelchair lifts, so they're very accessible. We put misting fans in a couple of key locations. So we can take care of you even in the heat. If you haven't seen this, I would suggest you come and see it, preferably in the morning when it's relatively cool. And then a project that's underway right now is the Rolling Hills Greenhouse project. This is roughly 20,000 square feet of production greenhouse out at the Rolling Hills facility. Just want to give a nod and express thanks to the team out at the forestry department who have been gracious enough to let us sort of join them in that area. There's some shared work that can be done, and so we're excited about a partnership there and looking forward to opening this facility later this year. This is just a quick snapshot of what the funds looked like at the end of last year. A lot of this has already been expensed. You can see Old Garden Road on there. That project is complete, but we're rapidly trying to complete all of the tax note projects and move into the projects that were part of the 2022 bond project. You'll see at the very bottom there, the second to last, that site preparation for the children's garden. That's part of that last picture I showed you, which is both some demolition of the old greenhouses, but construction of the new greenhouses as well. And then just give you a quick view of kind of where the $7 million from the 2022 bond program will be implemented. Any questions?
Questions, council?
Comments?
No.
From that last slide, how much are private funds?
So that 7 million is all public, and then there's private stuff that is associated with it. So you're not seeing the private side of this. And if you want, I can give you a more detailed kind of
Yes,
what we're
please.
anticipating the private to be on some of these.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So the question is whether Lightscape will come back, and the answer is yes. Lightscape is sort of revisioned, so it will be, thank you, by the way, it will be bigger, better, and bigger and better than last year. So it's definitely coming back. We're really excited about it. Just as a side note, we had, I think something like 52 engagements under that Winter Cathedral, and they all said yes. So we're pretty happy about it.
52, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
No
We
one
were worried.
awkwardly said no?
No, we thought, when we saw it happening, we thought maybe we should have like a counseling service at the end of the tunnel in case, but they all said yes.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Michael and Jared, go ahead.
So on the 4th of July, I noticed that there was, or around the 4th of July, I noticed that there was a drone show at the Gardens. Was that one of your public events or was that a
Oh,
private
Symphony in the
event?
Garden.
So that was part of the Concerts in the Garden. So we made a shift along with the good people at the Symphony and Orchestra. We made a move away from the fireworks and started doing drone shows, which were, if you didn't see, were amazing. They were awesome.
What was the feedback from the audience that participated?
The feedback from me, which is the one that matters, is it was fantastic. No, we got
You
really,
signed the checks.
really positive feedback. No,
It was very cool. I loved it.
Yeah, it was cool.
That was a chance for the fire department to stand up and clap. No
Right.
fireworks. Y'all missed it.
That's where I was going
I
with
know.
that.
It really was well done.
Yeah, thank you.
I would love to sit down and learn how y'all coordinated that.
Yeah.
And
It's
it was
pretty
really
amazing.
awesome to
Yeah.
see it from the highway, and I promise I was focusing on driving,
course
but
you
it
were.
was just so hard to miss.
Of course you were. It's worth noting that that was 100 drones. Dallas Arboretum did a similar thing with their concert series, but only 75 drones, so nobody's in competition, but
Michael.
just saying.
Does it? I just want to say thank you being on staff when all this transition was happening from it going with this partnership. And I know Mayor Pro Tem Bivens and Carlos sort of lived through it, and Maddie did too. You kind of see how this can work. And there was lots of animosity and angst about would public still have access to the Botanic Gardens? And you see that they do, and they're getting better and better events, facilities, everything else that's going on. So thanks for your stewardship of this treasure for the city.
Well, thanks for trusting us and allowing us to do it. We're really proud of this wonderful treasure the city has and feel very privileged to be able to be the stewards of it, so thank you.
You didn't even drop my favorite quote that you always give, which is emotional souvenirs of the Botanic
Thank you, Mayor.
Gardens.
I
Yes.
know Richard Zavala is saying the same thing. So if you haven't yet had a chance to come out to the Botanic Garden this summer, I would encourage you to come out and create an emotional souvenir
Thank
with
you
us.
very much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate you. Any other questions, council? Okay. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Patrick. Okay. We're moving on. Presentation on council strategic vision priorities. Mark McDaniel is going to lead us in that. What is our vision, Mark?
Hello, Mayor and Council.
Hi there.
We're going to talk a little bit about what we heard from all of you after your retreat in February. So we spent a lot of time with each of you. Oh, check. Okay, sorry. We spent a lot of time with each of you talking about what the different priorities meant, and hopefully you saw some of your voices coming back to you. There's two items in your packet. The first one was a little more detailed, which is on the screen, or at least an example of this, where it has the same information that you have in your PowerPoint, but down below, we tried to pull some quotes so that you saw that we understood what you were saying. And this is already coming into play in the development of the budget for fiscal year '24, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So if we can switch to the PowerPoint, which just tracks with the same document. Okay, so again, after the council met in their retreat, there was an overall priority of quality of life. And for the council and their interpretation, what that meant was economic development and community investment, community safety, and then infrastructure, responsible growth, and fiscal responsibility. And so we spoke with each of you about these. The other things that we're doing kind of behind the scenes, and you'll see later, is not just with the budget process, but with also staff operating plans. So each department will have a mini strategic plan, which we're calling Fort Worth Stat, where we sit down with each department twice annually outside of the budget process, and we look at their goals and how they're supporting your goals, and what action steps they're taking, and then also what the trends are and data is behind where they're doing and achieving those. So you can just see how this will all cascade from the work that you did back in February. So I want to talk a little bit more about each of these three priorities, starting with economic development and community investment. Create an environment where businesses and individuals have what they need to thrive. And you can see two sub-bullet points there, just again, very general. But if we drill down and go deeper, again, hearing from you as far as goals, this means to improve the development process, to invest in revitalizing neighborhoods, including access to food and dining options, attracting and retaining corporations and jobs. This might be headquarters of a major corporation. Ensure access to affordable housing and address homelessness, which I think was great in seeing that. You'll see that in multiple priorities, not just one. Support and develop small businesses. Focus on commercial and retail development, including the growth corridors. We heard a lot about growth corridors and mixed-use development, and sustain existing community and cultural assets, enhance recreation and learning opportunities. I think of all the three priorities, when Mr. Cook and I sat down with each of you, this was probably the one that had the greatest differences from among you, but we felt like it was all certainly relative to this subject, and so that's why you can see a lot of different things mentioned under this particular priority. Next, we go into community safety, and in our discussions, you'll recall, this is really not just about police and fire, it's also about code enforcement, street traffic safety, just a number of things. And so hearing from you, we heard that you want to have a regional lens in looking at the issue of public safety, not just city limits, because crime doesn't know boundaries, or problems don't know boundaries. Using data and technology to enhance public safety approaches, and then prioritize strategic partnerships. We heard a lot about partnerships and leveraging the city's resources, particularly when it comes to economic development, but also here in community safety. So drilling down on the community safety, you can see the goals. Increase community presence and non-traditional approaches to enforcement. Building trust through relationships, education, community listening. Easing the traffic flow and enhancing road safety. Heard a lot about traffic flow. Shorten response times, improve reliability and outcomes of public safety services. We also heard a lot about this particular item. Use modern approaches, data and technology. Monitor and review the use of CCPD and other funding sources, and then enhance neighborhood infrastructure. So I thought it was great to see this under community safety. We also see it under the infrastructure priority as well. And then finally, the third priority is infrastructure, responsible growth, and fiscal responsibility. And usually we got feedback on these three individually from each of you, and so we'll share that here now. So this is proactively planning for growth and using community-driven long-range plans to guide decisions, using a variety of mechanisms to build and maintain infrastructure, and then also leverage partnerships again. So partnerships, we heard that over and over again about how to leverage those partnerships. And then drilling down on this, enhancing connectivity of communities at both the neighborhood and citywide levels, maintain the infrastructure and assets on schedule, prioritize preservation of parks and open space, reduce and prevent negative impacts of flooding, provide opportunities for robust public engagement in all planning processes, and proactively plan for growth to ensure funding for and capacity of infrastructure, enhance stakeholder relationships to build trust, and identify opportunities for funding partnerships, and then also diversify the tax base and manage the tax rate. So the next slide just talks about next steps. Obviously, the presentation today, we are incorporating your priorities into the budget. In fact, this morning I met with Mr. Cook, and in concept, we have a balanced budget as of this morning, and now we're putting all those details together so that he can present that budget to you on August 8th. And so a lot of, I think, great priorities coming out in that budget process. And then the next thing we'll be doing is create systems that link and visualize plans. So part of this is Fort Worth Stat, but it's also dashboarding, right? So having the website with dashboards about your priorities and how well we're doing, and then reporting out to you on a regular basis. This is part of that effort with the lab in terms of data analytics. And so we have a company on board, you recall, Delivery Associates, that's helping us to build those databases and use those tools so that we can illustrate the work that's being done. So with that, Mayor, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from council members? No? Anybody have any feedback that doesn't seem this was aligned with what they discussed with Mark or team? Gina?
I have one, and I may be digging a little bit too deep in the weeds on this, but when you talk about database, What's the content of the database or bases you're talking about?
So what we're doing, the first thing that we have to do, and we're spending a lot of time doing this, is inventorying what we have. So we have so much data that people don't really know how much data we have from department to department in particular. So we're trying to make sure it's reliable and scrub it. So it may be data that's in the police department, or maybe data that's in HR, or, you know, you pick the department. Making sure that the databases are scrubbed and they're reliable, and then also making them available, and then matching up databases that have never been matched up before. So looking at what indications in one department might mean for another department, and tabulating those databases.
So here's a follow-up for you. A few years ago, we started creating newsletters, you know, by district. And my district was said to have had 10,000 or 9,000 subscribers. I asked the question, who are they? How do I add to it? How do I delete from it? I couldn't get any solid answers. And so that's not a criticism, and I don't know how that data was compiled anyway. But are you able to give hope that those types of questions can be addressed and corrected?
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably the primary goal in terms of this effort that we're underway now. They're spending most of their time looking at where the data is and is it reliable. And so we also want to have it centralized with the lab so that people can go to one source for all the data and know that it's reliable.
And one final question, this is the last one, I promise you, Mayor. We have a number of neighborhood associations and homeowner associations whose leaders die. They go inactive, and they're just hanging out there somewhere. So how do you do the impossible and still get the best information out to people? Because it's very important during the zoning process that people trying to get zoning changes be given accurate information on who to contact.
Right.
Case in point, on one of mine, I had just brought back a neighborhood association to life, but the information was given to the applicant for a zoning change was given those old people, who were the ones who the reason why it would defunct anyway. So is that going to be an improvement that we can anticipate?
Yes, that's a perfect example of you know, why the data is not really being utilized as well as it should be.
Any other questions, council? No. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you. Okay, moving on. Our next item is the Fire Ad Hoc Committee recommendation. I think that Valerie Washington and maybe Mark are both going to kick this off, and Carlos Flores, who's chaired that committee. Thanks, Carlos, for that service. Okay, perfect.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor, fellow council members, city manager and staff, and our audience members. Well, we arrived finally at a list of recommendations. The task was daunting at times, but we did it. In the fall of 2022, the City Council by resolution established a fire staffing ad hoc committee. We were tasked with doing three things. One, examining the fire department's current ability and recommend changes to meet their minimum daily staffing needs. Two, determine the baseline number of authorized sworn positions based on City Gate and the Local 440 Finch studies. Three, explore opportunities to use civilian personnel, including appropriate positions to staff with civilians. The ad hoc committee members were, yours truly, the chair, Assistant City Manager Valerie Washington, our consultant Hillary Shine, Fire Chief James Davis, Assistant Fire Chief James Horton, Local 440 representatives, many of which are here today, President Michael Glenn, First Vice President Zach Schaefer, City Attorney Christopher Trout, Richard Zavala, jack of all trades I would describe him as being, Casey Lamas, Oliver Organ, Christiane Simmons of, I guess formerly the Recall Planning and Data Analytics, AKA Fort Worth Lab, Mark McDaniel, Fort Worth Lab Chief and Transformation Officer, Casey Bess and Deanna Giordano from Human Resources. Our ad hoc committee started meeting on March 6th and held a total of 10 working meetings. Originally, the ad hoc committee was directed to achieve these goals and submit final recommendations to the City Council on or about April 1st for subsequent implementation. Out of necessity, we managed to meet scheduling around staff availability and the required time it took to collect staffing and operations data. We recommend a total of 76 positions, comprised of 70 sworn and 6 civilians. Having to operate 60 lone positions contributed to $31 million in overtime last fiscal year. Therefore, reducing reliance on OT was a priority for the ad hoc committee. Our presentation will show net savings over the course of the 3 next fiscal years. It is my honor to have served as chair, and I want to convey my sincere appreciation to each and every one of our ad hoc committee members for pulling together as a team to achieve our objectives and present to you our final ad hoc staffing recommendations. And I think Hillary Shine is next to kind of step us through some process comments. Hillary?
Thank you, Councilmember Flores.
Good afternoon. I'm Hillary Shine here with Strategic Government Resources. And can I just back up and say good job on the strategic priorities? Good job, everybody. We were here. So today I am here as the SGR representative who was working with the various stakeholders throughout this process. So as Councilman Flores mentioned, we met for the better part of 3 months through 10 separate meetings. Why did it take so much time and effort when we had reports already? Well, number one is we had a variety of stakeholders. So you may look at it and think, oh, firefighters. Well, we also had to look at the implications organization-wide. We needed to be able to justify every single position we brought back to you all as a body so that you could explain to the public whether you approved or did not approve the recommendations as presented. We had a couple of competing reports. Those reports talked about personnel, but they did not necessarily go into the full financial implications of what these decisions might make, short-term and long-term. There were policy decisions that needed to be made. We don't want to get back into the same situation that we are today. And so what do we need to do to structure the correct policies moving forward so that fire can continue to meet the demands that are required of them, but also so that the city as a whole can be involved in that process of position management and financial allocations. So all of that to say, we are going to present to you a significant amount of information that has been distilled into some short slides, but just for your reference, I mean, this is just a sample of the amount of data we went through. We went through position by position. We went through various financial models. We included the lab. We included human resources. The 440 was at the table every step of the way. And what I would say to you all is that I think the proudest part of this committee is that we worked through this as a team all the way, even with differing opinions from different stakeholder groups, and verified all of our facts and came out of it with the unanimous recommendation that's going to be presented to you today. So I'm very proud and very privileged to have served on this team, and the leadership of Councilman Flores was outstanding throughout, and Valerie Washington and Mark McDaniel, I mean, and Chiefs and Michael and everyone who participated. It truly was a group effort, and so I think we are all standing here together, proud of the accomplishment and proud to present to you what is coming next. So I believe it's Valerie. Thank you. All right, thank you, Hillary. Mayor and Council, thanks for the opportunity for us to come before you with these staffing recommendations. I know that you've been waiting, and I appreciate the patience you gave us to work with Hillary, the fire chiefs, HR, to really come together and come up with a defendable staffing plan that we're truly proud to present to this group. As Councilmember Flores and Hillary mentioned, we met for about 10 meetings. Generally 3 to 4 hour meetings. They were sometimes pretty intense. We went through and looked at every position. We looked at workload. We looked at performance metrics, really to make sure and to understand what every single position in the fire department was doing. As we did that exercise, we wanted to call out some of the key findings before we get into the nitty-gritty of the recommendations. One, you'll hear us talk about lone positions. And those are positions where we have a person in operations who's meeting the minimum daily staffing requirement. They are pulled from that position to staff somewhere else, leaving a hole in that minimum required staffing position, requiring the fire department to backfill that with an overtime position. We went through and looked at all of the lone positions that the Citygate
report called out, Chief Davis had made some changes as we worked through Citygate. So we had some adjustments in numbers. We found some new loan positions that we needed to take care of that Citygate had not referenced. We discovered as we looked at those non-op positions that they were all carrying out necessary functions. They were doing work that keeps the city moving forward, and they needed to continue doing that work. We had not established baseline staffing for those non-op divisions, and that was one of our charges. So moving forward with our staffing plan, Chief Davis and his team have baseline staffing for the non-operational divisions that they can use for future staffing conversations. As we talked through this, one of the other impacts to fire overtime, and everyone's right, we have been on Chief Davis and the fire department about overtime for the last couple of years. They have seen an increase in the number of special events and just special programs that they cover. That leads to overtime. Chief shared an article today that I think highlighted Dickies as one of the top facilities as far as bringing in concerts, acts, and other programming. So we'll continue to see that need for fire and police coverage there grow. Another item that we had a chance to talk about, but we need to dig in deeper, is the use of sick and family leave. We saw that leave increase. That's another thing. If you have firefighters on unapproved leave, you still have to backfill for their positions when they're not there. We spent about $11.7 million in fiscal year '22 on overtime tied to sick and family leave. That's an area that we want to work with the local human resources and the fire department again to get a better handle on that. So with that, we'll go into our recommendations. As mentioned, we list out it's 70 sworn positions and 6 civilian. At your places, I left a list that details out the exact positions and locations for where those 70 positions and 6 civilians would go. The table up here on the screen just shows the fire divisions from fire prevention through community risk reduction and the positions that will go to those divisions. We also talked about some fire operations positions. Fire had enough firefighters to staff minimum daily staffing, but there were other dynamics that were part of that picture. One, they have a 20% vacation relief ratio through collective bargaining. And so they have to cover the bodies and people who are taking vacation leave with bodies so you don't have to pay overtime. The fire department has struggled to fully staff the vacation relief positions. Our request recommends that they add 14 new vacation relief positions to their workforce to better allow for time off coverage. We also are recommending 3 new battalion chiefs and creating a battalion 8. Currently, there are 7 fire battalions. Citygate had recommended that we look at creating a battalion 8 just due to increased volume, citizen demands, and future citizen demands on the north side of town. So the chief and the team agreed unanimously to recommend creating that battalion chief position. As we went through the recommendations, really making sure we captured the loan positions, I said was key for us. We identified on this listing 53 positions that are going back to operations. Through this recommendation, we've established baseline staffing for the fire department and their non-ops divisions. We're also capturing overtime to help fund this help fund the staffing. Mark McDaniel will go into that in just a few minutes. And again, we have a baseline staffing that the fire department can use moving forward for staffing discussions. As we looked at the plan and how we would accomplish meeting the goal, we had a lot of conversations with our team about what is the capacity at the training academy and really what training instructors does the chief need at the training academy to really have successful, well-trained recruits. As we looked at that, we determined that 50 was kind of the magic number as far as recruits to get through a training academy. We flirted around and got up to 75. We even talked about 100 at one point in time, but really kind of scaled that back and realized that we didn't need to overstaff the recruit classes. We needed to make sure that there was a good student to instructor ratio. They were getting hands-on attention and getting the good training that we need before we release them. Our plan is to have 2 classes of 50, We propose having a class of 50 start in September. That would include the new recruits to cover the new positions, and it will also cover an attrition class. Fire generally loses 25 to 30 recruits a year, so we cover those through attrition to make sure they remain fully staffed. We would have a second recruit class in February of 50. Both of those recruit classes would complete by the end of the fiscal year, so those firefighters would be in place by the end of fiscal year 24. I do want to note, as you look through your listing of positions, it's really specific. We spent time, again, with the local and everyone on the committee, really breaking down the informations and understanding the functions. There is some flexibility here. When you look at even the dispatch positions, as we're continuing to have conversations about dispatch and 911, the fire rollover, or the rollover line that fire answers in helping the police staffing, that if there are things that change in the dispatch world, those positions could be adjusted and used in other places within the fire department. So there's some dynamic nature to these positions as we work with Chief Davis in the future. And I think with that, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you to cover the commitment to overtime savings.
Thank you, Val. And I think probably up to this point, when we look at the studies, the one thing that we never really had was a good handle on what was causing the overtime beyond, what was the obvious, but also how much should it cost, and if we were to fill those positions, what would be the savings? And so we worked, not in a vacuum in the lab, but we worked hand in hand with particularly Chief Horton on Chief Davis's staff and his team to really scrub these numbers and go back and forth to make sure we were both comfortable with the final numbers. And so you can see here at the top, which Valerie already mentioned, that we are running 31 million in overtime for 22. It looks like we're going to hit 33 this year. That's just, I think, salaries, not including benefits. And so we have much lower budgets, of course. So what we're anticipating is getting these graduates or these folks through class before fiscal year 25 starts, right? So we'll have 100 through by having a September academy and a February academy. This includes the folks that we may lose to attrition, which we factored that in as well, so that we could realize savings in overtime as soon as possible. So you can see the cost of training in fiscal year 24. This is moving all those people through the academy. And then you have some initial overtime saved with that first class, partially anyway. And then you can see by year 2 and 3, we're getting close to, well, it's 8.4 and then close to $9 million. I'm sorry, 13 and then 13.8. So the net savings is 5 million, as was mentioned earlier. So this is what we'll be counting on as we put the budgets together. They have been overspending their budget, so this necessarily wouldn't be a budget cut, but it would be a reduction in costs. And so as Val mentioned, we also want to look closer at sick leave and the impacts of sick leave because that has been a growing impact as we've identified in the process. The other thing that we felt was very important, I think maybe Hillary mentioned this, is that we don't want to go back to the same situation. And so we had a very good, productive meeting with the chief and his staff and HR about policies that we need to put in place to make sure that we don't end up back in this situation. So what we discovered is they actually have quite a few SOPs or standard operating procedures already on the books that will help to get this underway. Several of them are very old. And so we'll reference those again, but also upgrade them so they're a little tighter, not just on when you can move positions and for how long and what sort of authorizations is required, but when you can create new functions and operations, and there's even a process for that. And then just really looking closely also on a regular basis on the overtime. Oliver in the Fort Worth lab has built some great dashboards and done some data analytics and built some tools to monitor the time on a very close basis, to the point that when we calculated overtime savings, we were looking at individuals that had been in the position for some time. We knew exactly what the rate was. We built in the CBA adjustments for the next few years to understand what the impacts would be in future years as well. So I think that the job was very thorough. And again, I think this was an element that perhaps we were missing up to this point.
We're proposing our next steps would be to include the committee recommendations in the '24 recommended budget, to institute the policies and procedures we talked about as far as position control and movement within the fire department. Make sure we're implementing the recruit class staffing plan and working closely with HR on those deadlines and making sure the fire department has a good hiring list to choose from as they do those processes. Tracking milestones, and then continuing to work with the fire department's HR and city leadership on sick and family time usage. We wanted to make sure, again, Hillary showed you, we had a lot of information and it was hard to boil down exactly all that we needed to share with y'all today. Chief Horton did put together a good resource package that includes really all of the divisional presentations we've received from the fire department. That includes org charts, workload stats, deliverables, goals that we can send either electronically or print. We can send that to you as a good resource backup. And with that, we, again, as Mark, myself, Hillary, I'm sure Michael Glenn and his team and the Chief Davis and his team would echo just the amount of work and collaboration that went in. We had our storming and norming as a committee. But we were incredibly respectful and honest with each other. And I think we were all very proud of being able to reach a unanimous staffing recommendation to offer to you today.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Mark. Questions, council? Gina wants to report
The
electronically.
resource packet, yeah, we can have that. I appreciate Chief Horton and his team putting that together for us.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council? Elizabeth, go ahead.
And we talked about it yesterday, and I'm still a little unclear. Based on the Citygate report and the total number of positions that they recommended we have in the Fort Worth Fire Department, does this fill all of the positions they recommended? I know yesterday we talked about how there wasn't a bottom line number. They were all kind of scattered all over the place. But have we consolidated that? Do we know what their ultimate recommendation was and where this gets us towards that goal?
Yeah, I have their listing of all the loan positions that they called out, and they called out 60 total positions into different priority levels. No, I'll hand this out separate. I'm sorry, it was just the print from the Citygate report that shows the different fire divisions and the recommendations. And I think we mirror very closely to what Citygate provided to us. We did find additional positions or different positions. For example, Citygate had not called out a firefighter that was helping us with recruiting efforts and helping us with diversity, minority recruiting, and getting out in the community. So Citygate hadn't captured that, and it is one that we captured and made sure that we took care of through this process. But Councilmember Beck, I will send out the Citygate listing so you can compare it. But it's pretty close. And looking at the listing, they didn't get into the specifics. They just called out fire prevention. They recommended 11 positions, and I think we were pretty spot on with the same recommendation. So I think as we look through, there's maybe a few that differed, but I think we were really, really close to what Citygate recommended.
Okay, Gina, go ahead, and then Michael.
Okay. It's a wonderful report. I appreciate the tag teaming. You cannot convince me that you end up with a love fest when you get so many different people in the room. We've heard from city staff, but we've not heard from people representing 440 who was there. I'd like to know if 440 reps were in sync and if their president can come to the mic, or is that something later?
We can do that. That's fine. Let's do council questions, and I'll have Sherman or Michael come up to the podium.
Okay.
Michael. Okay. Anybody else have questions before I bring up Michael or Sherman? Michael, go ahead.
I don't really have a question. And again, this may come out with what you're talking about. I do remember some specific number, Elizabeth, as part of this. But I also want to just put on the record too, this isn't a fix forever. So this is the starting point, and we will continue to have these conversations as our city continues to grow and we add across. So this might be good for now as a recommendation, but this will continue to be a conversation we have to have.
That's exactly what it was intended to do, Michael. It sets the pace to make those, and I think I was either Valerie or Hillary you mentioned, or both, that it will help us in subsequent, fire staffing talks.
And Michael, as you come, I hope you can give some feedback as to where there may have been some challenges and how you all got to some resolution. And I just need to hear from somebody other than traditional city.
And before
Tab, you're
Michael
it.
starts, sorry to interrupt you, Michael. Valerie, how does the increase look in training? So 50 person per class, what's been our average in the last few classes? Or
I think, I mean, I wouldn't say fire's been close to 40 to 50 people in their classes over the last couple of classes. Am I wrong? Am I right? Okay. 35, okay, so we're increasing it by
it's a
15.
decent increase, but
Yeah.
there's no concern from fire or 440 about that increase to 50 in those classes.
No, and we talked a lot, like I said, we tried to push it, we were trying to be a maximizer and, see if we could push more through. But we had an honest conversation about what's feasible. Deanna, the HR director, talked to us about health and safety. And I think that as a group, we landed on 50 as being that safe number. They can do more, but it may require a little bit more resources and just some more thoughtful planning to pull it off.
Okay, thank you, Val. Michael, go ahead, please.
Sure. No, thank you very much. Councilmember Bivens, I appreciate the question, and Mayor and Council, I appreciate the opportunity to get up and actually get to speak to this. I would offer up that we are in agreement with what's being presented. It definitely was 10 meetings, and it wasn't, we had differing opinions as we worked through the data, as we worked through the findings. Of course, we came to the table, being firefighters out in the field, and understanding what we're seeing and what our members are seeing. These are needed positions. We've been sounding the bell for the last couple of years, as you know. I'm glad that we finally got to the point where we're going to be adding positions because we've been needing it. We're hiring, you're spending a lot of money on overtime. We're hiring a lot of firefighters every day. I'm looking forward to a continued conversation, as mentioned, about sick leave and what opportunities we can have to have a good conversation about that, because that can be a cost-saving measure. Long-term, there really are some long-term cost savings that we can look at. But these are definitely needed positions. They will be very, very much appreciated by the members out on the front lines working in, I think you mentioned 106 degrees today, that are going to be out on a brush fire later today, or are going to be out on a house fire, and it could be 2 houses going at the same time, which we saw earlier this week. This will be a much-needed relief for our members to where we're not having to work as much overtime. And
Michael,
they're looking forward to it.
Talk more about overtime, especially for these new people around the table.
Yes, ma'am.
What that issue has been, why it's been such a challenge, and why you're, I'll say glad we're at where we are now.
Right. So there's a number of my members here from our executive board, and they all would echo the same thing, that when many of us hired on, if we were offered to work, a few hundred hours of overtime a year, that was a pretty big year. That was a lot of hours. And then it crept up to where we were hitting 700 hours, then over 1,000 hours. And the amount of hours that are being needed to staff the trucks because of vacancies in the department or other needs in the department, our guys, we're working, there's a lot of overtime. And so it's to the point now where we are now beyond people volunteering to work, they're having to get force hired. So, yesterday morning and this morning, Monday and Tuesday, late in the summer, we had to tell firefighters, roughly 7 to 10 firefighters, I believe, each day, that you're not going home. You thought you were going home, but you're going to be here working on a Fort Worth fire truck, serving the citizens, and that's okay. But when it's, multiple days a month, multiple days a week that we are having to force people, it's this staffing by adding these positions, and it's going to take a year. It's going to take a year for us to hire and train, and we understand that. But this time next year, we're hoping, or roughly this time next year, that what we're facing with having to force hire firefighters to work overtime to protect the residents that you serve and that you represent, that it will really decrease the amount of those force hire needs. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions for Michael, council? Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. I guess I think you put up a presentation screen about the transition process for the 24 fiscal year. What we're proposing to bring on as new hires.
This one here. So we're proposing, right now, the authorized strength for the fire department is 979, and we're proposing to increase it by 70 positions, bringing it up to 1049.
For 2024?
For 24.
Okay. And you said 70 positions?
Yep,
And-
70 sworn positions.
Okay, and that's gonna be a budget, item.
Yes, it's going to be included in the recommended budget.
Okay. The other question I had, I know it was mentioned about, having, paramedic, training for one of the, firefighters who are on the fire truck. Is that included in this staffing study?
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, that training, and there's some additional professional development that was included in the Training Academy budget that will help with new recruits and with current firefighters and driving and safety.
Okay, I'm just wondering if it's gonna be an additional cost. That's what I'm,
I think, I mean, we worked with the Fort Worth lab to really make sure we had all the costs fine-tuned and that everyone on the committee agreed with what those costs were. So I think that we're pretty tight.
Any other questions, council? No? Okay. Thank you all
Thank
for the
you very
presentation.
much.
Appreciate it. Okay, our next item is an update on the selection of Chief Noakes Police Advisory Board. I think Chief Noakes is up.
Mayor and Council, I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to come before you today to give an update on our Community Advisory Board. And what I would like to do, since we do have some new members on council now, is go back and give just a brief explanation of what the Community Advisory Board is and what their duties are going to be. Everything we do at the Fort Worth Police Department, we look back to our mission. What is our mission here at Fort Worth? And it's to provide quality service in partnership with the community to create a safe environment for all. And that partnership is part of what we're talking about here with the Community Advisory Board, because we are partnering with our community. The goal of the Community Advisory Board is to empower Fort Worth residents to work with the police department in a collaborative working group to further the goal of fair, just, and dignified treatment of every person, while also keeping our residents safe from crime and disorder. Our strategy is to have the Community Advisory Board collaborate with the Fort Worth Police Department and the Office of the Police Oversight Monitor, OPOM, to develop a more transparent, fair, and equitable police department through a review of and recommendations to Fort Worth PD on policies, procedures, and practices. When it came to the number of members, to be honest, given the spectrum of the different communities and cultures we see in Fort Worth, we wanted to keep the number small enough that everyone had a voice, but also large enough that we could include more groups. We're looked at a maximum of 19 members. In a minute, I'll show you the current members, which sits at 14 currently. What we did was included a diverse array of individuals from across the Fort Worth community who've already got experience, who are involved, who are acutely aware of the things that are going on in Fort Worth, and many of whom are already involved in finding solutions to the same problems we're dealing with at the Fort Worth Police Department, and you as city leaders deal with as well. So we looked at a lot of civic and social service organizations, businesses, economic development organizations, faith leaders, and those involved with youth and education. These are our current members. First, we have Susan Garnett, CEO of MHMR, Felipe Gutierrez, who works at One Safe Place and also is the LGBTQ liaison, Lauren King, who's the executive director of the Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, Annette Landeros with the Fort Worth Hispanic Chamber, Pastor Parrish Lowry with the Greater Friendship Missionary Baptist Church, and he also has another unique perspective, given that he is with Tree of Life Funeral Directors and actually has had to take part in directing the funerals of many who've been involved in gun violence and unfortunately lost their lives to it. So he brings a very unique perspective. Caleb Gonzalez is in the tech industry, and he's one of our young adult representatives. Bishop Rodney McIntosh is a community advocate who also brings a very unique perspective in that he's able to help us see the perspective of those who have been involved in the criminal justice system and maybe help us work on our policies and our practices in dealing with that community. Brother Lee Muhammad is with Mosque 48 and is a very involved member of the Muslim community in Fort Worth. Dr. David Sines, he's the Director of Innovation at Fort Worth ISD. Ty Stimson with the Fort Worth Metropolitan Black Chamber of Commerce, who also practices law here in Fort Worth. Estrus Tucker, who has been involved in a countless number of initiatives in Fort Worth over the years. One very notably was the Race and Culture Task Force. Raleigh Vanam, who is with the Hindu Temple of Greater Fort Worth. Estella Williams, president of the Fort Worth Tarrant County chapter of the NAACP. And Judge Brent Carr, who's now retired. And one of the things that really drew us to him, not only was he in Criminal District Court 9, but he was involved with 3 different specialty courts. One involving mental health, one involving veterans treatment, and one involving those who were exploited through sex trafficking and human trafficking. And through his efforts, over 1,000 people were diverted from the criminal justice system and actually had enhanced lives after their participation in those specialty courts. So I hope you can see that what we have here is a group who have been involved, a group here who's making a difference in Fort Worth already, and a group who can give us some great ideas and feedback on the policies and practices of the Fort Worth PD. So as far as the duties, we want them to review and understand our policies and procedures first, and that's part of what we're going through right now is the onboarding and training. Then they'll be able to gather and evaluate and discuss information relative to our policies and procedures. They can serve as an additional avenue if someone wants to make a complaint or a compliment on an officer and direct those to OPOM. They can also help identify other issues that may need to be addressed by the department or OPOM. And we want to have them develop a pamphlet, something that can go out either hard copy or digitally to the community so the community understands what the Community Advisory Board is and does and how they can make recommendations to them as well. Lastly, for the duties, we'll be providing updates on the activities of the CAB through the city's website and through our website. They're going to be identifying potential issues to solve or improve. They're going to obtain input from the community and present that kind of information to us for more issues we need to discuss. Collaborate with subject matter experts to determine the best possible solutions. Then propose policy and procedure recommendations with that stakeholder involvement. Then they review the implementation of those policies, procedures, or practices that can be recommended. So we've had 3 meetings so far. First one was on May 30th. We met at the Bob Bowen Public Safety Center. First, we just went around and introduced the attendees, gave a little bit of information about each one and why they were selected, but then allowed them to tell why they were passionate about being on this board and what they hoped to bring to the board and to actually get from being on the board. One thing we determined was not every meeting had to be at Bob Bowen. We want to make sure that we are going out into the community, going to their places of business, their houses of worship, different community venues where we actually get outside of our own silo and get out in the community with them. We discussed a lot of policies, but not just the policies as they're written, but the perceptions of the community. Because no matter how a policy may be written, the perceptions in the community may be different, and that's something we have to address. We discussed our general orders to kind of give them a sense of the operations of the department. That's going to take several sessions to cover. It's about 500 plus pages. And we also invited the board members at future meetings to come and give presentations on their areas of expertise and areas they think that could apply to the Fort Worth Police Department and our policies and procedures. These are the areas of focus for the meeting. General orders, training, and that was training of the board, but also training of our officers, the goals and needs of the department, and then we just opened it up for hot topics and current events. Our next meeting was June 29th. One thing we determined there was the frequency of the meetings. We want to meet at least quarterly, but we determined starting out we need to meet at least monthly to make sure we keep the momentum going, to make sure we get the training and the onboarding done in a reasonable amount of time. So we'll be meeting on the 3rd Monday of each month at 6 p.m. We went over the general orders again, and then we also moved into our 5-year strategic plan, both of which are also available online for anyone who would like to see those. Last meeting was just last night. Continued on the general orders and the 5-year strategic plan. We also discussed some more community topics, police topics, and we talked about the schedule for their training. This is one topic that came up over and over again when we talked about issues they wanted to see discussed as far as our policies and the way we deal with the community. It came back to homelessness. So one of our first training sessions will be on homelessness in Fort Worth. We're going to have members of our homeless outreach team, our HOPE unit, there to be part of the discussion, but also have Lauren King, who again is with Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, to host that discussion. Again, everything comes back to our mission, and the partnership with the community and creating a safe environment is something we hope to establish with the Community Advisory Board. And those three words at the bottom, accountability, collaboration, and transparency is what we're achieving. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Questions for Chief? No? Go ahead. Go ahead, Jeanette.
I'd like the opportunity to appoint somebody to the board. Would that be possible?
I would open discussions with any member of council about additional members to the board, so I'd love to set something up and speak with you.
Any other questions, council? Go ahead, Carlos.
Chief, cover for us again. When you reapproach the cab, one of the things that I was looking for is how you were going to approach it from the police staffing side of things. We saw the community members. Can you give us a little more information on what that looks like on the police staffing side of things?
That's a great question, council member. So when we looked at the prior board, and it was called the Policy Advisory Committee when it was originally created, it was very heavy on police participation and rather light on community representation. So this time we wanted to make sure the group itself reflected the intent of the group in the first place. So the only three members of the police department that have been in any meetings are myself and Deputy Chief Buck Wheeler, and we were actually going to announce this at a later meeting, but I'll tell you now, Deputy Chief, formerly Commander Monica Martin, but Deputy Chief Monica Martin is in there as well. So myself, those two deputy chiefs are the only police representatives, and the reason we do that, Deputy Chief Wheeler has been involved in training for years and years, and he's very intelligent, does a great job connecting with people and explaining topics. He engages with people really well. Deputy Chief Martin is exactly the same way. She's able to engage with people, talk about topics in a way that people want to hear what she has to say. She's very intelligent and also very well informed. So between the three of us, that is the only representation we've had at any meetings. The only time we will see additional representation from the department is when there is a request for certain type of training that may involve our department, and then we may have officers there that can either help facilitate that training or be a part of the training program.
Just another follow-up question. How do you see this body working with OPOM? You know, one question could be, is there a member from the OPOM office present at any meeting? How do you see this working in that respect?
One thing we discussed yesterday, actually, I asked the group, I said, when Bonseal, our new monitor, arrives, I said, I would like to be able to bring her in, let her talk with the group, ask any questions you have and find out a little more about her position and what she brings to the table. And they're all about that. And once she's there and determines what that should look like as far as the OPOM's participation, we would welcome having them there in every meeting if they chose so.
Any other questions? Chris?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I do have a couple questions. I will just mention to Councilwoman Jeanette Martinez. I think she wasn't here when we took the vote in November, but once we bring that back up, you will have the opportunity to select somebody of your choice on that board if we're able to get that passed. I do want to ask a couple of questions. When I looked at what this group would be doing, one thing I did not see was discussion of if there is an incident that takes place critically in the city of Fort Worth. I know you mentioned complaints or condemnation on one of those slides, but I'm sorry? Okay, thank you.
I believe this may cover what you're asking. One of the things we open up in every meeting, any hot topics or current events, and we opened that up last night. Anything that may have occurred with the Fort Worth Police Department, the city in general, they want to talk about, it's open. We'll talk about any issues they would like to discuss.
Okay, so in your recent two meetings, I think you had in, I guess, well, in June, you would have talked about it, but in this last meeting, did the hot topics come up for what happened the week, 4th of July?
Yes, there were some brief discussions about that.
Okay, and so, going back to Councilman Flores' question, because I think when we talked about, again, and I bring this up, I think you brought this board back because of the conversation we had about the oversight board.
This was a board that we had discussed bringing back anyway. We had the,
Sure.
what was called the Chiefs Advisory Board,
Right.
which continued, was stalled a bit during COVID. And this Policy Advisory Committee had just kind of fallen off. There was talks to bring that back anyway, but it did happen right around the time of the review board recommendation.
Right. And so one of the questions I think that came up during that review cycle was the participation of your command staff. And I think Carlos just asked that question. But I think it would be important that it is written in, I guess, whatever your policy and procedures is, which of those command staff will attend those meetings on a regular basis so that we as a council know and the community know. So maybe there be a person they can reach out to in the mix of meetings when they're not meeting, or regular community members can reach out to those individuals who are a part of that group.
Okay.
So I think you mentioned Officer Martin and Officer Wheeler,
Yes, sir.
which is great. Is there a mechanism for those who sit on your board to call a meeting? Or will, if something takes place, or will it just be on that third Monday until further notice?
You know, it's actually a really good question. As far as having a mechanism in place, that's something we ought to work on, because we told them if they had any issues, if they wanted to call a meeting because there was something so pressing in the community, they did not want to wait till the next regularly scheduled meeting, that we could do that. But that's something we need to work into our policies to make it standardized.
Okay. Another thing in the process of revamping the oversight board, one of the things that the community was asking for is public connection. So say, for instance, you have your meeting, and some of those meetings need to be private, but as any of your meetings throughout the year can be public, where other community members can come and sit in those meetings that you have.
We don't have any plans to make the meetings public, but we have discussed having forums to
Okay.
discuss the Community Advisory Board and to get some more citizen input from time to time.
Okay. I think that was the question I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Beck?
Yeah, can you tell me, because there definitely seems to be some changes made to the duties of this board from the last time that you brought it to us. I believe there wasn't
Those are actually the same slides.
even the received complaints and commendations concerning Fort Worth law enforcement. Was that on the previous, then this was, I think, maybe, was it 6 months ago? It was a while ago. the
It's
last
been a
board.
while ago. When I made this presentation, it was based off the prior, so these slides should be the same. I guess it's possible that there's some changes, but there weren't any intentional changes.
No, it's okay. I could misremember as well. It leads to my next question. I see that some of the advisory board members were members of the Race and Culture Task Force. And so as you were developing this particular advisory board, what feedback did you get from the folks that chose to serve on this board that were on the Race and Culture Task Force? And what feedback did you get from any community members that you extended the invitation to join this board from?
There were some that decided they wanted to join right away. Some say that they did not want to join because they felt that might hinder the opportunity to have the Citizen Review Board, which they wanted to see as well. And then, quite frankly, there were some that agreed to join, but after seeing a meeting here and hearing some backlash from the community, didn't want to be a part of it because they feared community backlash.
Backlash for their service or backlash for the board?
Yeah, both, for their service on the board.
And did they indicate why they felt like there would be community backlash?
Well, it was
And you can surmise it for me.
what they saw on the reporting about one of the meetings here and some of the comments from some of the community, and then some comments not publicized, but just among community members. And some of the people who were asked their dealings with certain groups who were against this, and they had dealt with them in the past, and they didn't want to deal with them anymore.
Okay, that's fair. So with the stated goal of this is to create a more transparent, fair, and equitable police department. I appreciate you doing that because any step forward is obviously a great step. Do you think that this answers the community's call for what they were looking for when it comes to transparency within the Fort Worth Police Department?
It depends on who you ask in the community. Some would say yes, some would say no.
And some of those people that you called and asked, right? Some said yes, some said no?
Yes, and there's actually some on the board who were for the Civilian Review Board, and that's one of the topics they want to discuss in the meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Councilman Nettles?
This board, will it replace I know you have a pastors group.
Yes, it will not replace that.
Okay, okay, good. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Any other questions for Chief? No? Thanks for the update, Chief. We appreciate it. Okay, council, that's the last of our presentations. And we'll ask now requests for future agenda items or reports needed by council. Surely y'all got a list you've been waiting to give to David. Councilmember Crane?
Nothing? Wow. You do? I've got two things. One, in light of some of the other things going on, I'd like to know top five, an IR on medical directors, who they report to in emergency services. And I'm just putting this together, top five, maybe cities in the Metroplex, and then maybe top 10 cities in Texas, who they report to and what that looks like. I know we're going to talk about some other things, but I think that's some information we can get before any other studies are done. And the second item is, given light of changing economy and other things, I'd like to know citywide what contracts we have in place that were originally over 5 years long. And so what they were when they originally went into effect, how many years are left on those contracts, and what the ultimate contract cost was at that time. Yeah, I don't imagine there's many, but it'd be nice to know when we're looking at budgets and things.
Any other future agenda items for council?
Yeah,
Chris,
I have one. I've already sent the email, but as it relates to repairs to water meters or shutting off water meters on a Friday to commercial businesses, churches, and residential, how does that policy works and looks, and if it needs to be changed? They can't get access to water until Monday.
I'd like to bird dog on that. I'd like for us to also include in that report requested by Councilmember Nettles, what audiences or what circumstances have to exist to prevent a shut-off. Because when I was with Encore, if we had your information that you were on oxygen, we wouldn't shut you down. People thought that we knew, but are there any instances that water will not be terminated during it's really critical weather incidents is what we called it.
Thank you, Gina. Any other questions? Jeanette, go ahead.
Well, that could be something that just be added when they're registering for water services, if they need to upload any documentation for, health conditions. I would assume that would be a quick implementation.
Anybody else? Elizabeth, did you have one or no? I missed you. Wait, okay. I think that's all. Thank y'all very much, and meeting is adjourned. Yeah.